On the 20th of May, 1969, at 1000 hours Indochina time, United States paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division stand atop Joy 937, a rain-soaked summit rising 937 meters above the Aisao Valley floor in Tuatien province. 10 days of fighting have cost 72 American lives. Another 372 soldiers lie wounded. Artillery batteries have hurled over 20,000 rounds into the hillsides. The hill belongs to the United States. 2 weeks later, the paratroopers walk back down, and the hill belongs to no one. Rain falls on corrugated leaves as news cameras capture exhausted young men, and a new name enters the American lexicon, Hamburger Hill. The event flips overnight from tactical victory into national scandal. The story Americans hear goes like this. Reckless commanders spend lives to seize worthless ground, then abandon it days later. Newspaper editorials call it senseless slaughter. Senator Edward Kennedy tells the United States Senate on the 22nd of May, 1969, that the assault represents madness. The myth says the hill never mattered, that officers chased body counts, that doctrine demanded static territory. Footage of muddy soldiers stumbling through elephant grass seems to confirm the waste. Yet inside Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Command history files, and 101st Airborne Division after-action reports, a different calculus emerges. The hill was never the goal, disruption was, and public perception killed what tactical logic had designed. By May 1969, General Crichton Abrams has replaced General William Westmoreland as Commander United States Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, MACV. Abrams abandons the search and destroy model in favor of territorial security and population protection. The A Sao Valley, straddling Tua Tien and Quang Tri provinces, remains a key infiltration corridor from Laos. People's Army of Vietnam forces use the valley to stage weapons, supplies, and troops before pushing into coastal cities like Hue and Da Nang. Operation Apache Snow, launched the 10th of May 1969, targets PAVN Base Area 611 along the western edge of the valley. 5 United States battalions sweep north to south through triple canopy jungle, aiming to disrupt logistics before the next monsoon surge. The 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry Regiment, call sign Rakasans, draws the assignment to clear Hill 937. Lieutenant Colonel Weldon Honeycutt, commanding the Rakasans, receives intelligence reports indicating a fortified PAVN regiment on the ridge. On the 10th of May, at 1400 hours Indochina time, lead elements make first contact with bunkers dug into the reverse slope. The PAVN 29th Regiment has spent months preparing interlocking fields of fire, spider holes, and concealed mortar. Pits, United States forces push uphill through rain, mud, and entrenched automatic weapon positions. By the 14th of May, the battalion has suffered dozens of casualties without reaching the crest. General Melvin Zayas, commanding 24th Corps, reinforces Honeycutt with 2 additional infantry battalions and increases artillery support. On the 16th of May, at 0830 Indochina time, a coordinated assault stalls in monsoon downpours. Medevac helicopters cannot reach the wounded for hours. Rain drums on corrugated leaves, turning trails into streams and nullifying air support. Forward air controllers circle above clouds, unable to mark targets. On the 18th of May, at 0600 Indochina time, Zeiss orders a multi-axis attack supported by massed tube artillery and aerial rocket artillery. More than 20,000 artillery rounds land on Hill 937 slopes over the course of the battle. Each battery fires time-on-target missions to saturate bunker complexes seconds before infantry advance. On the 20th of May, infantry from 3 battalions assault simultaneously from the south, southeast, and northeast. By mid-morning, paratroopers reach the summit and find abandoned positions, shell craters, and an estimated 630 PAVN bodies. The hill is secured. MACV declares the operation a success, but television crews film gaunt, hollow-eyed soldiers cutting jungle paths, and the images reach American living rooms within 48 hours. Correspondents ask a simple question: why fight 10 days for a hill you do not keep? The mechanism that worked on the ground collides with the mechanism that works in public opinion and loses. MACV doctrine in 1969 does not prioritize terrain ownership. After the Tet Offensive of 1968, Abrams shifts United States strategy toward interdiction and pacification. The objective at Hill 937 is to destroy the PAVN 29th Regiment before it can threaten Hue or Da Nang. Intelligence places the regiment at over 1,200 soldiers equipped with heavy mortars and recoilless rifles. Destroying or scattering this force protects populated areas and delays the next offensive cycle. Colonel Joseph Conmee, Assistant Division Commander of the 101st Airborne Division, writes in his operations summary that clearing Base Area 611 disrupts 3 months of enemy buildup. Holding the hill serves no logistical function. It lacks water sources, road access, or defensible perimeter configurations. United States doctrine calls for find, fix, and destroy, not seize and occupy. On the 20th of May, after the summit falls, Honeycutt's battalion conducts a rapid census of enemy equipment: 82mm mortars, 12.7mm machine guns, B-40 rocket launchers. Engineers blow bunkers with satchel charges to deny reuse. The Rakkasans extract on the 21st of May, moving northwest to interdict another suspected trail network. The plan always included withdrawal. Apache Snow is a mobile operation across 150 square kilometers. Yet CBS correspondent Murray Fromson broadcasts footage of soldiers leaving the hill and calls it abandoned. The word spreads. The military spent lives for dirt, then walked away. Senator Kennedy reads the CBS transcript into the congressional record on the 22nd of May, 1969, calling the attack senseless and irresponsible. How can we justify sending our boys against a hill a dozen times, finally taking it and then withdrawing a week later? The question ignores the mission, but it captures the perception. Inside MACV headquarters in Saigon, planners note that the PAVN 29th Regiment has scattered into Laos and will require months to reconstitute. The A-Sao corridor remains quieter through June and July than at any point in the prior year. Tactical disruption succeeds. Strategic narrative collapses. Abrams himself acknowledges the problem in a June commanders' conference, stating that we executed the plan correctly, but we lost control of the story. The United States public does not pass military concepts like area denial or economy of force. They see young men climbing a muddy slope under fire, reaching the top, and leaving. The logic that made sense in Third Corps tactical zone briefing rooms evaporates in the glare of evening news. Hill 937 becomes Hamburger Hill, a symbol not of tactical competence, but of strategic drift. General Zayas defends the operation in a press conference on the 24th of May, arguing that the enemy was there and we went after him. We don't fight for terrain in this war, we fight to destroy enemy forces. His explanation, accurate on military terms, lands flat with reporters who have watched soldiers bleed for elevation. The contradiction embeds itself. The mission worked as designed, yet the design no longer matches national patience. Not a failure of tactics, but a failure of translation, turning field success into political catastrophe. Casualty figures dominate the debate within hours of the summit's capture. By the 20th of May, the 101st Airborne Division reports 72 killed in action and 372 wounded in action across all battalions engaged at Hill 937. The Rakkasans alone account for roughly 60% of those losses. MACV claims 630 PAVN killed, citing body counts conducted under fire and confirmed by ground sweeps. The ratio, nearly 9-1 in favor of United States forces, fits the metrics Westmoreland championed in earlier years. But by 1969, the American public no longer trusts body counts. Revelations of inflated figures, double counting, and civilian misidentification have eroded confidence in the numbers. When MACV announces 630 enemy dead, journalists ask how many were verified versus estimated. The answer, mixed sources, some from aerial observation, some from ground patrols, fuels skepticism. On the 23rd of May, the New York Times publishes an editorial questioning whether any hill is worth 72 American lives. The editorial does not address PAVN casualties, mission objectives, or strategic context. It focuses solely on United States losses. Inside the Pentagon, analysts note that 72 deaths over 10 days represents a lower daily casualty rate than many earlier engagements. Yet perception ignores comparative statistics. The concentrated nature of the fighting, one hill, one battalion, one news cycle, amplifies the toll. Hamburger Hill becomes a focal point because it is legible. A single place, a clear cost, an ambiguous outcome. Lieutenant Colonel Honeycutt, defending his decisions in later interviews, emphasizes that the enemy chose to stand and fight. We did not pick that ground arbitrarily. Every man we lost hurt. But if we'd walked away, that regiment would have hit Hugh in June. His logic is sound within the frame of military necessity. The PAVN 29th Regiment, unengaged, would have threatened urban centers during the upcoming offensive season. Destroying it in the A-Sao, away from civilians, fits Abrams' priority of protecting population centers. But this calculation never reaches the public intact. What reaches them is a photograph of a mud-caked soldier staring at nothing, a hill in the background, a caption reading, "Was it worth it?" The question is rhetorical. The image answers before words can. Casualty aversion, already rising since Tet, accelerates after Hamburger Hill. Congress begins drafting legislation to limit offensive operations. Senator George McGovern calls for immediate withdrawal, citing the Asau battle as evidence of tactical insanity. Inside MACV, planners recognize the shift. Operations must now be designed not only to succeed militarily, but to minimize visible United States losses. Vietnamization, the transfer of combat responsibility to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, gains urgency. Abrams receives guidance to avoid high visibility, high casualty engagements unless absolutely necessary. The memo does not define absolutely necessary, leaving field commanders in ambiguous terrain. The math that justified Hill 937, enemy destroyed, corridor secured, urban areas protected, becomes the math that constrains future operations, not because it failed, but because the audience changed the equation. Television coverage transforms Hill 937 from a tactical event into a national referendum. On the 18th of May, CBS News correspondent Murray Fromson accompanies a rifle company during one of the failed assaults. His camera captures soldiers pinned down by machine gun fire, medics dragging wounded through mud, and officers shouting coordinates into radios under a grey sky. Rain falls on corrugated leaves, the microphone picking up the hollow patter between bursts of gunfire. The footage airs on the CBS Evening News on the 19th of May, reaching 20 million households. Anchor Walter Cronkite introduces the segment with a question: is this hill worth the cost? The segment includes no strategic briefing, no map of Base Area 611, no explanation of PAVN logistics. It shows exhausted men fighting for reasons unclear to them and, by extension, to viewers. On the 20th of May, after the hill falls, Fromson films soldiers celebrating, but the tone is muted, edged with bitterness. One sergeant tells the camera, "We just took this hill and tomorrow we'll probably give it back." The prediction proves accurate. By early June, no United States forces remain on the summit. Fromson's follow-up piece, broadcast the 8th of June, uses the word abandoned 4 times in 2 minutes. The narrative solidifies. Commanders wasted lives for symbolic victory, then discarded the symbol. Newspapers across the United States pick up the story, many using variations of the phrase Hamburger Hill, a nickname soldiers coined to describe the meat-grinder intensity of the fight. Life magazine publishes a photo essay on the 6th of June, showing wounded paratroopers and a burned jungle canopy. The essay includes no quotes from MACV, no operational context, only images and captions emphasizing futility. Inside the Pentagon, public affairs officers scramble to provide counter-narrative. They release casualty ratios, maps of PAVN infiltration routes, and testimony from General Zayas. None gain the traction of Fromson's footage. Visual media outpaces written explanation. A soldier's mud-streaked face communicates more than a briefing slide. The optics trap closes. The more MACV defends the operation, the more defensive it appears. General Abrams, in a cable to the Joint Chiefs on the 2nd of June, writes that the tactical outcome was satisfactory, but the perception outcome is unacceptable. We must avoid operations that can be portrayed as pointless, regardless of their military merit. The guidance marks a turning point. Perception now shapes operational planning. Field commanders receive informal instructions to weigh media impact before committing to multi-day battles. The phrase "another Hamburger Hill" becomes shorthand in planning meetings for engagements to avoid. By July 1969, 3rd Marine Amphibious Force and 24th Corps adjust tactics to emphasize rapid strikes, small unit patrols, and quick withdrawals. The shift reduces United States casualties, but also reduces pressure on PAVN logistics. Ironically, the optics that constrain American forces liberate communist planners to rebuild unmolested in borderlands. Hamburger Hill does not change what happened on the ground, it changes what can happen afterward. Not a military defeat, but a narrative defeat, one that reshapes the war's final chapter. The accusation that United States forces abandoned Hill 937 rests on a misunderstanding of mobile warfare. MACV never intended to garrison the hill permanently. Operation Apache Snow's purpose was to disrupt PAVN Base Area 611, not to establish static positions. Military doctrine in 1969 emphasizes economy of force. Commit troops to an objective, achieve the aim, then redeploy. Holding Hill 937 would require at least 1 rifle company, plus engineer support, plus a firebase for artillery coverage. The hill's elevation, 937 meters, and its isolation make resupply expensive and dangerous. Helicopters flying into the Asau face ground fire, weather delays, and mechanical strain. Garrisoning the summit would drain resources from population protection missions in the coastal lowlands. On the 21st of May, the 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry, completes its mission. The PAVN 29th Regiment is scattered, bunkers are destroyed, and captured documents reveal supply routes. Engineers blow remaining fortifications, intelligence teams photograph tunnel entrances, the battalion moves northwest to interdict another suspected infiltration trail. This is standard operating procedure for a mobile operation. Yet when reporters arrive at Hill 937 in early June and find it unoccupied, they frame it as abandonment. The disconnect between doctrine and public expectation is total. Americans in 1969, shaped by World War II narratives, associate victory with holding ground. Iwo Jima, Normandy, and Incheon are understood as seizures. You take it, you keep it, you win. Counterinsurgency and mobile interdiction offer no equivalent clarity. Hill 937 is not Iwo Jima. It is a piece of a larger puzzle involving trails, caches, and timing. But this complexity does not survive the editorial process. On the 10th of June, Newsweek runs a headline, "The Hill They Gave Back." The article describes paratroopers as bitter and disillusioned, though unit morale reports from 101st Airborne Division show cohesion remained intact. Soldiers understood their mission, journalists and civilians did not. Colonel Conme, in a post-operation debrief, notes that the men were tired but proud. They knew they had broken the enemy. The story that we abandoned the hill is false. We finished our work and moved on. His clarification never reaches mass media. The narrative of abandonment, simpler and more dramatic, dominates. Inside MACV, frustration mounts. Planners produce maps showing reduced PAVN activity in the ASAO through June and July, evidence that the operation achieved its goal. They note that no major attacks hit Hue or Da Nang in the weeks following Apache snow. This success, invisible to television cameras, counts for nothing in public debate. Perception requires visible, permanent change. A flag on a hill, a city liberated, a border secured. Hill 937 offers none of these. It offers disruption, delay, and attrition, concepts that do not photograph well. By mid-June, the term Hamburger Hill appears in congressional testimony, editorial cartoons, and protest chants. It symbolizes not what happened, but what people believe happened, pointless sacrifice for ephemeral gain. The hill, still standing in the ASAO, becomes a monument to the gap between military logic and democratic patience. Not abandoned by soldiers, but by the narrative that could have explained them. By late June 1969, Hamburger Hill has entered American consciousness as shorthand for futility. The battle itself recedes, the symbol remains. Inside MACV, planners recognize that future operations must account for domestic reaction. The war's tactical dimension now runs parallel to its perceptual dimension, and the two no longer align. What happens next is not retreat but recalibration, and the beginning of the end. The immediate aftermath of Hill 937 reshapes American military policy in Vietnam. On the 8th of June, 1969, President Richard Nixon announces the first withdrawal of United States combat troops. 25,000 soldiers will leave by August. The announcement follows weeks of domestic uproar over Hamburger Hill and accelerates Vietnamization, the plan to transfer combat responsibility to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. Nixon frames the withdrawal as progress, but internal White House memos reveal it as damage control. Public approval for the war, already declining, drops to 32% by mid-June, according to Gallup polling. Congress responds with legislative action. On the 9th of July, the Senate passes an amendment prohibiting funds for ground combat operations in Laos and Cambodia without explicit congressional approval. The amendment does not mention Hill 937 by name, but floor speeches reference it repeatedly. Senator Mike Gravel of Alaska reads casualty lists into the record, concluding, "We are spending blood for real estate we do not want." The phrase captures the public mood. The war has become transactional, and the transaction no longer makes sense. Inside MACV, General Abrams adjusts operational guidance. A directive dated the 15th of June instructs Corps commanders to avoid multi-battalion, high-intensity operations with significant United States casualties unless directly tied to population security. The phrasing is bureaucratic, but the meaning is clear. No more Hamburger Hills. Field commanders interpret the guidance as a restriction on offensive action. Some, like Major General Melvin Zayas, argue privately that the restriction cedes initiative to the PAVN. Others, recognizing political reality, embrace smaller unit tactics and increased reliance on ARVN forces. By August, United States battalion-level operations drop by 40% compared to May. PAVN units notice the shift. Captured. Documents from July and August 1969 indicate that communist planners perceive reduced American aggressiveness. One intelligence summary, translated by MACV, notes that the enemy is avoiding large engagements and yielding the initiative to our forces. The phrase "yielding the initiative" is optimistic. In practice, PAVN units resume infiltration along routes that had been contested in May. The Asau Valley, quiet through June and July, sees renewed truck traffic in August. Sensors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail detect increased movement. The disruption achieved by Operation Apache Snow proves temporary. This is not unique to Hill 937. All mobile operations face the problem of sustainment. The difference is that post-Hamburger Hill, MACV lacks the political clearance to return and disrupt again. The hill itself remains unoccupied through the summer. Aerial reconnaissance in July shows vegetation reclaiming the summit. By September, the cratered slopes blend back into the jungle canopy. No United States or ARVN forces return. No PVN forces reoccupy in strength. The hill, once contested by thousands, becomes irrelevant to both sides. Its relevance now exists entirely in memory and symbol. Soldiers who fought there return home to a nation divided over their service. Many receive no parades, no public acknowledgement. Some face protests, others face indifference. Veterans of Hill 937 later describe a sense of betrayal, not by their commanders, who they generally respect, but by a public that judged their sacrifice as wasted. Lieutenant Colonel Honeycutt, who retires in 1970, spends decades defending the operation in interviews and memoirs. He insists the mission was sound, the tactics appropriate, the outcome successful. He is correct on all counts within the frame of military analysis, yet the frame collapsed in May 1969, and no amount of retrospective justification rebuilds it. The institutional United States Army absorbs the lessons of Hamburger Hill into its doctrine. Post-war studies emphasize the importance of aligning military operations with political objectives. Clausewitz's dictum, "War is politics by other means," gains renewed attention in staff colleges. Officers study Hill 937 as a case in which tactical success and strategic failure coexisted. The battle becomes a teaching point. Victory requires more than seizing objectives. It requires explaining why those objectives matter. In Vietnam, the war continues for 6 more years, but its character changes. United States ground combat steadily declines as Vietnamization accelerates. By 1972, fewer than 50,000 United States troops remain in country, and most serve in advisory roles. The ARVN assumes responsibility for major operations, with mixed results. When Saigon falls in April 1975, Hill 937 is a footnote, remembered by those who fought there, but invisible in the final collapse. The hill's symbolic weight, however, endures. Hamburger Hill becomes a reference point in subsequent American conflicts. During the Gulf War, commanders explicitly avoid Hamburger Hill scenarios by emphasizing speed and overwhelming force. In Iraq and Afghanistan, planners invoke the specter of prolonged high-casualty fights for ambiguous objectives. The phrase resurfaces in debates over body counts, mission creep, and public support. Hill 937's legacy is not its tactical outcome, but its perceptual impact. It taught the United States military that battles can be won and wars still lost if the story goes wrong. Rain falls on corrugated leaves in the Asau Valley, and the hill stands silent, a monument to the gap between what soldiers do and what nations understand. The soldiers who climbed Hill 937 in May 1969 did not fail. They executed their orders under extreme conditions, broke an entrenched enemy force, and achieved their operational objectives. The 630 PRVN casualties, the captured weapons, and the disrupted supply lines represent tangible military success. Yet success on the ground could not overcome failure in narrative. The American public, watching from living rooms thousands of miles away, saw only mud, blood, and apparent pointlessness. They did not see logistics networks severed or urban populations protected. They saw young men dying for a hill that would soon be empty. The perception, though incomplete, became the reality. MACV's inability to control the story, to translate tactical logic into public understanding, cost more than any single battle. It cost legitimacy, patience, and political will. Hill 937 accelerated Vietnamization, constrained offensive operations, and fed congressional opposition. It became a turning point not because the military lost, but because the nation stopped believing the military could win in a way that mattered. General Abrams, reflecting on the battle in a private memo months later, writes that we may have won every engagement and still lost the war because we could not explain why we fought. His observation captures the tragedy of Hill 937. It was a competent operation rendered catastrophic by perception. The hill itself, empty and overgrown by the end of 1969, no longer matters. Its elevation, its bunkers, its trails, all irrelevant. What matters is what it came to represent. The moment when tactical success and strategic failure diverged irreconcilably. The moment when rain on corrugated leaves drowned out the sound of purpose. Hamburger Hill stands as a reminder that wars are fought twice. Once on the battlefield, and once in the story told afterward. The United States military won the first fight and lost the second, and in doing so, learned a lesson that echoes through every conflict since. Win the hill, lose the narrative, and the point. Hamburger Hill proved that tactical competence without perceptual control is not enough. The battle succeeded by every military measure and failed by every political one. Soldiers did their duty. The system that sent them could not justify it. The lesson endures. In modern war, the story is the strategy. And if you lose the story, you lose everything.